Welcome to Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Story Talks is produced by Narativ, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Story Talks. As you all know, Julienne, Ryan, and I, Jerome discuss the ways that businesses engage their employees and customers. We are particularly interested in how storytelling and listening practices can help increase engagement. One of the critical elements of engagement is financial health. And today we have a guest whose job it is to advocate for better financial health through workplace solutions.
Thank you. And we've created a list of questions we're going to ask Matt today to inform ourselves and others about this. We're going to address what we mean by financial health. What can businesses do to ensure their employees' financial health? Is it simply about better pay? That's one question that came up. And what about the gaps between the values that companies espouse and what they actually do to support their employees? And I'm sure we'll have a few extra ones too tucked away in there. So
yeah,
thank you.
For sure. So thanks, Jules. And so today, let's introduce our guest. Matt Bahl is on the show, and we're really thrilled to be discussing these questions and more. So I met Matt when you were still at Prudential as a VP of Financial Wellness Customer Strategies. And I was coaching Matt and other executives to present at a financial summit that was all about financial wellness. And Matt told a very moving story about his dad and connected the audience with the topic of financial wellness in a way that was real and actionable. So today he's Vice President and Head of Workplace Financial Health. And we're really happy to have you on, Matt. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's a joy to see you again, Jerome. And it's great to meet you. And we're here to talk about my favorite topic, financial health. So what can go wrong?
That's right, exactly. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what it is that you do, and what is it about? What is financial health? I think that's a thing that probably our listeners might want to define a little bit more.
Sure. So I work at the Financial Health Network, which is a 501c3. It is the nation's leading authority on individual, consumer, and employee financial health and well-being. And we accomplish that by really seeking to influence those that are engaging directly with either consumers or employees. So I lead a whole team that works directly with the employer community as well as those seeking to distribute solutions. And the goal is, frankly, just to get them to be better actors and to really prioritize their workers' financial health as both the right thing to do, but increasingly we're seeing evidence that it's the right business thing to also accomplish. We define financial health as when someone's financial systems work together and in concert to meet the individual needs so that people can thrive and be resilient. And to do this, we have to recognize that people encounter their financial health in a myriad of vectors. So whether it's through their financial banking institutions, their workplace, the healthcare system. And so we really seek to provide sort of an ecosystem approach to recognizing that someone's financial life doesn't start and stop when they enter the workplace, just like someone's financial life doesn't start and stop when they're banking with their preferred financial provider. I think about the concept of financial wellness, if you were to Google those, you'd have like 1,000 different definitions.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what it's really all about is how do we make people's lives better by improving their financial resilience to help them thrive. That's really what it's about.
So the piece about financial resilience and improving that, like what do businesses have to kind of do with that? Because of course, coming at it from a perspective of someone who's, sort of sees the financial contributions of businesses towards their employees as being your salary essentially and your benefits. What else is there? I mean, do you sort of, when you talk about an ecosystem, what are we talking about that you sort of identify in terms of, is it about identifying gaps and filling those gaps? Like how does that work?
Yeah. So it's complicated, as you would expect, but the way that I think about it and the way I think the Financial Health Network thinks about this is start at the paycheck, right? The paycheck is the essential building block of financial health. From that paycheck, that all other opportunities in financial health really blossom. And so really understanding and working with organizations to help them maximize the value of the pay that they provide, recognizing that while compensation and income matters, it is not determinative necessarily of financial health. There are lots of other factors that play into that, including a lot of behavioral factors that we also seek to influence. And in the workplace, you see this because that's just where people get money, right? It's through work. And just on a very practical level, the place where most people spend the vast majority of their time is also the place where they derive the financial benefits that are the spring for them to live the type of life that we want them to live, or that they want to live. Now, of course, people then take those dollars and that income and they interact with the financial institution, they interact with the retirement vendor, they interact with insurance companies, they interact with their local markets and grocery stores. And so it's really about the different ways in which people engage with the financial system, and really looking at how we can make, in my case, workplace work better for working people.
So how did you come to be, in this field and kind of make this your life's work? How does that happen?
I'm a typical millennial and have not been able to hold a job for very long, and it's been to my benefit. So, I spent my entire professional career in and around the workplace. I started as a labor and employment attorney, specializing in collective bargaining, employment discrimination, ERISA law. That led me then to human resources, where I was a human resources executive for a number of years. That then led me to Prudential, where I led a series of teams, including most recently a team of consultants that worked with large employers to build financial wellness programs, and then ultimately to the Financial Health Network. So it's always been sort of a professional interest of mine of the role of work and the dignity that work can bestow and the opportunities to make work better for more people. But, Jerome, as you know, it's also very personal to me because one of the, I would say, catalytic moments of my career was actually that summit that you helped prepare us for. And it was not just about financial wellness, but it was about inclusive solutions. It was really thinking about how do we make financial wellness more accessible to more people. And so I told the story of my dad, and I'll give you maybe the Cliff Notes version of that. I won't give you the. I still have the full talk in my head, but I'm not sure it would lend itself to a podcast. So really, what it started with is that my dad, blue collar, right, never went to college. Really, by the time he was in his early 20s, had 4 kids. So he was a young father and was fortunate enough that he started a small janitorial business. And this business was really his way of earning an income, right? For him, it was always a job. It was not a calling. And we can talk more about what I think some of the problems with careers as callings. And he really did it because what his priority were his 4 kids. And he wanted to help his 4 kids achieve their dreams. And so, he invested what he could in order to make the business work, but he didn't save for retirement, and he didn't have disability insurance or any of those things because he was just going to sell the business when it was time to retire. Well, he got all 4 of his kids to achieve their dreams. We all wanted to be college basketball players. We all were. And so, that was a huge success, I think, for all of us and him. But then 2008 happened and the Great Recession, and he lost his business. And in losing his business, he found himself in the same position of the vast majority of the U.S. population, which is he had 0 saved for retirement. And the vast majority of the working population doesn't have that. Many people don't even have access to an employer-sponsored retirement plan. So he found himself starting from scratch. And, being an industrious, hardworking person, like he got a job in a warehouse and was a warehouse worker for a number of years. Well, 2012-ish, I think, he was climbing a ladder and he fell 11 feet from the ladder. And this put him out of work. And doctors weren't sure if he was ever going to be able to work again. But like 25% of the U.S. population, he experienced a disability event that made him unable to work. And so he really, in many ways, experienced the financial hardships in the most extreme ways that so many other Americans have experienced. He's doing better now, right? He is now a security guard at the high school that he watched all of us play basketball at, which is great. He's umpiring baseball and staying connected to youth sports. But, his journey is ongoing. And he's going to have to work deep into his 70s in order to, meet his retirement goals. And he is focusing on his health. And to me, it just seemed like here was a person who did everything he was told to do, right? He worked hard, he raised his family, he invested in his kids, he gave his kids a better life than what he was able to have. And his reward for that is just not material. So to me, that just seemed like an unacceptable outcome, and one that, you know, we had a real chance to change. And interestingly, Jerome, I don't think I've told you this before, but at that speech that I gave when I was at Pru, Jennifer Tescher, who's the president and CEO of the Financial Health Network, was in the audience. And so she actually came up to me afterward, and we had a really nice visit. And that was, I think, another thing, like, you know what, I really want to dedicate more of my time to this. I want to focus full time on how to make this better for workers. And Pru's a great organization, but, you know, Pru is a for-profit, and they have their goals and objectives, as they should. And I wanted to go work in an environment where I could, you know, really evangelize the cause of worker financial health.
Wow, I'm very curious,
Yeah.
Jules, what you think, because I don't think you, well, you had not heard that story before, and I
Well,
probably
I haven't
gave some
heard in the
version.
original.
Yeah.
And the original from the actual person who lived it and experienced his father. I mean, it's an important one, because here's a man who did all the right things for the right reasons. It wasn't that he squandered money or bought fast cars and things, and, you know, things happen. So I think that it's a really compelling story. And as Jerome probably says, you and your father show up in many of our workshops too, as a thinking prompt or something to look at on the website to inspire that this is real things. We're not contriving situations for the point of creating a story. This is heartfelt, and there's a lesson there. So I think you offer quite a bit. And how does that work? You mentioned you're a millennial and all the changes you've gone through. How do you capture? Like, I grew up in a household. My father worked AT&T before it broke up, or phone companies for 30 years, 4 years. That was the way things were. And then my generation, we moved quite a bit into different companies through mergers and acquisitions, or being just changed happen all the time. So how do you get that same note of urgency to your customers, or to the young people coming up the pike? How do you use story for that?
Yeah, it's so funny, Julianne, because like my grandfather, you know, World War II veteran, didn't spend a day in college. He was a mechanic for the Denver Post for 35 years, and he retired with a defined benefit pension plan and a retiree medical plan. Well, those have long since gone the way of the dodo. And, you know, as I think about the sense of urgency, you know, I think that is the challenge of our time, which is, how do you communicate that urgency in a global economic environment where there's such a premium placed on career, there's such a premium placed on work, and how do you ensure that the priorities that an organization from an employer perspective has, that the values that they state publicly actually align to the actions that their workers feel. And I think right now what we're experiencing is a massive disconnect between them. And it's easy for a large organization to put out a really polished statement advocating for X, Y, or Z. You know, if you're a nerd like me and you read proxy statements when they come out, like, there is not a proxy statement I've seen that does not tout that their workforce is their most important asset.
Right.
But I think there's a huge lack in action supporting that statement. And I think workers feel that. You know, workers, you know, regardless of education level, feel that disconnect between the statements that some organizations make and the actions that manifest in that commitment. And that's really where I spend a lot of my time, is how do we better align that? How do we better help organizations dialogue with their workforce, understand the needs, and then deliver valuable solutions that actually address the real problems that workers face? And that's the, you know, that's the work that we do.
Yeah. You know, it's funny, because a question that might seem really would have an obvious answer is coming to my mind, and it has to do with that sort of disconnect between, you know, the actions and the values that you see. Because I mean, and I would say that that's, you know, it's not just about the workforce, but it's true about everything that a company says they're about. I think right now, and for a long time now, most consumers, they don't take that at face value. You know, we look at things like that and okay, well, show me the evidence, show me the proof of that. Because if you don't, I'll go to the ones that do show me the proof, because there's a lot of people saying the same thing. And I wonder, you know, the question that comes to my mind is like, I mean, what's the reward that you see for a company to go from, we've got this value, to we live this value, and here's the proof of it, here's the evidence of it, when it comes to these workforce, kind of these labor relations, essentially, between workforce, employers and employees.
Yeah,
What's
I
the
know we've
reward?
only got, I know this is not a 12-hour podcast, that's a 12-hour answer question, but let me maybe break it down into some components that I think inform that. One is actually, I think, this idea of moral injury. And you don't often hear this manifest in the workplace, but I think it's real. And I would say moral injury as distinct from burnout. So moral injury is this idea that that people bear witness to or sort of fail to prevent an action that transgresses like their moral beliefs. And so you think about this generation that's coming into the workforce. In my generation, we were taught that your career should have an impact on the world, right? And so, great, like we're motivated, we come in here, we want to have an impact on the world, and then we just don't see those actions manifest. And so this phenomenon, I think, of moral injury is really one of the underlying, I think, factors that goes often undisclosed or undiscussed, which is that misalignment of statement to action doesn't just do damage to a corporation's brand or any of those things. It actually does real damage to the people. And it's distinct from burnout, which is sort of this, just excessive strain, lack of resources, all of those things. This is really, people feel it in their bones, right? They feel they have been wrong by that. And I don't think you can underestimate the role that that's playing right now, particularly as you've got a whole generation, and now two generations, millennials and Gen Z, that really, have been told that their career is about impact. And, I think that for many, that's just never going to be the case. Like sometimes it's just a job. And people need to find meaning in places other than their careers. So that's some work that we need to do individually. But I also think that these corporations and these large employers have got a lot of work to do to really think about what are the incentives that they are responsive to, who are the stakeholders that they're responsive to, and how do they actually show those actions. So, there's a whole body of work happening right now, whether you call it conscious capitalism, stakeholder capitalism, whatever it is, but it's really about recognizing that simply taking actions only to the benefit of the investor community is something that more of the public is frankly just leery of, because they want to see a brand that actually takes into account the well-being of people, not just the well-being of a particular segment of investors. Now, investors are important, right? They're really key stakeholders. Workers are just as important. And you've seen this whole ESG movement sort of explode within that. The E's pretty well defined, the G's pretty well defined, but that S is not that well defined. And so we are seeing more corporations and companies leaning into, well, geez, that S is really the people, right? That's the people. That's the stakeholder class that we need to be really focused on, both for their consumers, but also for their employees. And we're seeing some companies doing some really remarkable things. PayPal's doing remarkable work around that. Chobani is doing phenomenal work around this stuff. So it's not as though that we are not seeing this. It's that it's just not hardwired through all of the different facets of our economy.
Yeah. And it's good to know that there are models out there, right? Some people are doing it. Yeah. Jules, you want to?
There's three words that come to mind when you were speaking about, had these immediate reactions to how younger people are buying things or how we've been accustomed to purchasing product. And it was our ability to customize it, control it, and have a voice in the product. And I wonder if that's playing a pact into the products you're encouraging your clients to buy or invest in, or look at how they're informing their employees about their investment products and what they can have control over or have a voice in.
Yeah, in some ways, it's like the workplace Hippocratic oath, right? Which is do no harm. And there are certainly financial products out there that I think cause more harm than others. And employers are actually very adept at evaluating solutions for their workforce with that in mind. But what we're seeing is that employees have a broader range of needs that have largely been unaddressed. So it's not just about retirement savings. It's not just about adequate insurance. It's about how do I manage the day-to-day ebbs and flows of my personal finances. So how do I absorb a $400, tire blowout, or my water heater breaks in the dead of winter? How do I deal with that? Real day-to-day kitchen table issues. That people deal with. And, so I think you're seeing a growing recognition that, employers are being asked to deal with a lot more than just, saving for retirement. This last year, we hosted innovation sessions with 20 of the largest companies in the country and some early stage fintechs. And those fintechs focused in two areas. One was credit and debt, and the other was short-term liquidity. And so the credit and debt solutions really came up because during the pandemic, employers had an unprecedented view into people's lives, right? Whether they were working remotely or whether they were working in brick and mortar locations, you just saw people in a whole new light. And it was a collective sentiment where we were all experiencing the same crunch at the same time, which is pretty uncommon. And what it really crystallized for a lot of employers, I think, and for workers was that, so many Americans are just crippled with debt and bad debt, pernicious debt. And there wasn't a impetus for sort of mass solutions out there. And so you saw workers going to their employers to say, hey, you want to support me in this time of need? Help me pay down my debt. Help me build more credit. Help me get out of this, pothole that I'm perpetually stuck in. And so, I often think of credit and debt as the BMI of financial health, right? To use a healthcare term. And so we saw a lot of innovation and a lot of work happening to really help solve for credit and debt in ways that are beneficial long-term to individuals. We also saw on the short-term liquidity side, and this is anything from earned wage access to payroll collateralized loans to micro saving solutions to hardship funds. Really what those are designed to do, by and large, are weather a short-term shock. There's a wonderful researcher, Carrie Leanna at the University of Pittsburgh, that's doing some really interesting research around the value of short-term savings. And I really think that if an employer were to call me today cold and I knew nothing about them, and they would say, what are the three things that I should do to improve the financial health of my workforce? One, I would say, give people and fund an emergency savings account. Fund it. Like don't try to make people save for it themselves.
Right.
Fund it. Put $500 into an employee savings account, and that will give people tremendous comfort. The other thing that we've seen long term is give employees ownership interest in your company. Grant equity awards as part of your compensation practice. You look at long-term wealth building. If you look at long-term wealth accumulation, there are a few things better than ownership. And granting restricted stock units or ESOPs or some other mechanism to give your workforce ownership in the work that they're doing. Not only are there studies that show that actually manifests in better outcomes for the business, but it also generates the type of wealth and wealth accumulation that companies say they want to provide. And so doing those things. And then the third thing that I would say is don't obsess about the fixtures, obsess about the plumbing. And what I mean by that is there's an impetus to go add new solutions every time, an issue pops up. It's like a HR version of whack-a-mole where, someone's struggling with this, let me solve that, let me solve that. It's like, okay, that's fine. But, what about your employee experience, right? The number one challenge we hear from employers is the field of dreams fallacy, which is just because you build a program does not mean people will come.
Right.
And if you
true.
just add more fixtures, doesn't mean you're going to get more people to come to them. So think about the employee experience. How do people experience your benefits? How do they navigate that? How do you make it easier? How do you streamline your benefits and experiences? So those would be the three things that I would recommend. Just flat. If someone called me cold and said, hey, give me three things to do, those are the three things I would recommend that employers do.
Yeah, that's great. And you took that right out of my mouth, because that was going to be one of my what are three things employers can do. So
I can see I can see you nodding along, Jerome. I can see the question forming in your mind.
I
know. Yeah, exactly. Well, so one of the things you talked about as you were just now in terms of that, the credit and debt issue, and the solutions that are emerging through fintech companies, for example, and others. It reminded me of something, because one of the things that I wanted to do before we wrap up here is talk a little bit about the value of storytelling in this context. And you just reminded me that we actually worked with a fintech company, and one of the things that was really effective in kind of understanding what is it that you're going to impact with this particular product was when there was one of their people told a story about being in college, ending towards the end of her college career, she had a baby, and she got married, and her husband was looking for a job. I think maybe he just started a job as a teacher, and she was finishing college, so they really didn't have much. And now they have this baby, and she described getting a short-term loan and being approved. She was approved on a Friday night, and the loan wouldn't come into her account until the next week. And so she now had the prospect of a weekend without a babysitter because they couldn't afford it, with having to go to the grocery store instead of having that dinner date with her husband. All these things, and we're not talking about a lot of money. And that's what made me think of what you just said, because it reminded me of that. And when she told that story, of being in the supermarket with the crying baby and things are falling, and it's like, I got to choose between buying diapers and buying food, really. And I'm not, I mean, it's kind of like the story of your father. I'm not someone, you would think would have this kind of problem, but we're just a few minutes away in her case. I mean, a day away from, it was Friday. If it had been Wednesday, she would have gotten her money, and then she would have been able to do all those things. And I think to me, that's sort of getting back to the question of storytelling. When we hear those kinds of stories, and when I hear you, Matt, describing in those very specific terms of like the $400 water tank that blows out, that gives me a completely different picture. And I start to understand, I start to see myself in it. And I guess my question is, where do you see the role of storytelling in what it is that you're doing, which is a lot about raising awareness and educating? I mean, you've got these great kind of talking points and things that people can do. But how do do you think storytelling has a role in terms of getting people to that sort of finish line, in terms of like, yeah, no, you're right, that shows me that I should do it, or what is the role? Maybe it's something else.
Yeah. So data without storytelling is as useless as storytelling without data.
Mm.
And they go hand in glove. And you need the data because you need to be able to be able to talk about the numbers, because at the end of the day, some of these things just come down to numbers, particularly for a company deciding on what to do. But if you don't also add that storytelling and you don't humanize that, then you were doing a massive disservice. So it's easy to recite the Fed stats around, the vast majority of the Americans don't have $400. That's not compelling. Like, it's interesting, but it's not compelling. But the story that you just told, Jerome, or the story about someone who can't get to work, or who has to quit a job because childcare is too expensive and they can't afford that, like, that's people's lives. And there's a human component to that we can all relate to. In fact, some of the best, sort of benefit campaigns I've seen in the workplace have been not from some sleek brochure or some really highly choreographed video, but it's, you know, an employee to employee saying, hey, here's why I use this benefit. Here's what I got out of it. Here's why it matters. We don't see enough of that. I'm always surprised that, people are not putting their workforce up front to say, here's how I benefited from this. Here's why I use this. Here's what it did for me and my family. I think companies talk about that, but I don't think a lot of them do that. And so, I certainly see part of my role as, being a financial health storyteller, because we have data. Like, there's no shortage of data to make a compelling case for why this matters. But that data is clearly not enough to move hearts and minds. You need that narrative. You need that story. You need the story of my dad. You need the story of your friend. You need the story of, everyday average working people, to do that. And I often talk with folks, and it's amazing how resilient people really are, and it's amazing how sometimes they don't even recognize how inspiring their story is, because they just live it every day. Yeah. And so it's like, how do we make what feels unremarkable remarkable? Because it really is the way that many people manage their daily lives. And those are the things that are largely missing, I think, from this conversation. Financial Network has long been involved in storytelling. So we were, one of our seminal pieces of work was the Financial Diaries, which was following around low to moderate income workers for a year and actually gathering their stories and telling their story. And that is that's an important part of this whole facet. Is you got to make it real, and you got to make it feel like the way people feel it, not the way, some analyst feels it, locked behind a mahogany door.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a good point. It's like in terms of making it real. I mean, for me, the best way to make it real is what you said, is that, the person who's telling the story matters just as much as the content or data that it represents, right? And so we're much more likely to listen to people who we can relate to, than, the CEO of a big company, for example. But if you hear it from employees themselves, that's really key. And I could see how that would be a game changer. And I love that, the financial diaries, and sort of following, here's how we live, and here's who
Yeah.
we are. And I think there's something, to me, what I notice also is that when storytelling is involved, there's something empowering. And it sounds certainly that was the case for you, even, Matt, with your experience with Jennifer Tescher, and then, kind of making that move. But that's available to anyone. And, the minute that you start to ask someone for their story, well, suddenly they have a voice now, and they're being given permission to exercise that voice. So maybe what we're really talking about here is, those kind of employers really listening, and finding the stories and sharing those stories, not just, making it sort of theoretical.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, stories, when you share them, you're seeing the person, you're hearing them, and you're appreciating them. So my next question is, being curious, is do you have any favorites? You mentioned the story diaries, you mentioned PayPal. And do you have stories, ones that you bring forward quite a bit, or even use as an inspiration for yourself to say, okay, I know this
Yeah.
is possible?
Yeah. First of all, it's a great question. And
Thank you.
you, so I think there are, I use my dad's story a lot because it's so top of mind and so relevant. But there was, I'll tell another story. So I was working with a company recently, and they were getting ready to deploy we have an assessment framework that organizations can use to gauge a financial health, and we were talking through it and sort of really talking about the nuts and bolts of how to deploy this survey. And I took a moment when I was working with this HR leader, and I said, what's really missing here is the conversation with people, and really understanding how you can get out there and in front of them. And so we ended up designing the survey to where they would do the assessment, because at scale you just have to. But then we actually set up focus groups, and we went and met with workers, right? And we talked with them, and what we learned was that there was information you get from talking to people that no survey can ever give you.
Correct.
And so we learned things. There was this one particular person, is a first generation American, right? He immigrated to the country recently. He was a shift supervisor at this particular plant, and he was talking to us about that he still has family back in Mexico, and he still sends money back. And he was showing us the cards he was getting from his family back in Mexico, about how important it was and how proud of his family they were of him. And you just saw someone that had such tremendous pride in the work that they were doing. And he also talked about his own struggles with gaining access to being able to afford a car, because he didn't have a credit history in the United States. And he talked about not being able to he was homeless for a while because he wasn't able to put down first and last month's rent and all of those things. And so you realize that what people are really struggling with are not necessarily the things that sometimes HR leaders focus on. It's, hey, I'm new to this country. How do I get access to a car so I can get to work? How do I find a place to live so I can do that? And, Workplace provides a mechanism to do that. There's also emerging fintechs that help do that. So, Nova Credit is a wonderful organization that actually helps new immigrants to this country bring their credit history from their host country to the U.S. credit market, right?
Wow.
So we're seeing solutions emerging. You also see companies like Isuzu, which is a new fintech that allows individuals to, report their rent payments to the credit bureaus to build credit, as a means for them to work towards a trajectory of being able to buy a home. So you see these solutions, but those would have never occurred to this employer had they not gone and had the conversation with some of their workforce. So that's a really salient example. Yeah, we can look at this and say, along the spend, save, borrow, and plan continuum, which how we do it, here's where they struggle. But when you go and have the conversation, that's when it really pops. I'm like, oh, we're dealing with humans here, and we need to have human
Yes.
solutions for human problems.
And Jerome, if I can build on that, so you're giving us a great example of all those anecdotal tidbits of information somebody can use just on the strength of that conversation. I think the other opportunity for storytelling is when we're sharing a big brand company. Sometimes it's so easy to say, well, that's them. They can do it. They have the resource. You mentioned PayPal. But the ability to use storytelling helps break it down to the steps and the components that could be attainable for maybe a smaller company or somebody that's trying to build that kind of relationship with their employees. So I think you have quite an opportunity there, what you're doing, and using that philosophy of storytelling to make it doable.
Do you guys like cupcakes?
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
So
I love food.
Awesome. So there is
right question.
So there is, in the Bay Area, there's a wonderful company called Lila's Cupcakes. And
I'm writing it down.
Lila, and I'm telling you this because there's a point to it that relates to financial health.
Okay.
So we invited Lila to come speak at our workplace conference this past year. Lila is a Black woman, small business owner, really impressive person. And we had her come and tell her story about, changing careers, starting this cupcake business, how she views as a small business owner her role in promoting the financial health of her workers. And it was really magical, both in the sense of like, who doesn't want to listen to, a modern day, Willy Wonka talk about the magic of confection, as well as the role of like retirement savings for their workforce. Yeah. But, we see lots of stories like that of like small business owners. Financial health isn't just the purview of large companies, right? And small business owners play a massive role. State legislatures are playing an increasing role. You think of programs like the Cal Savers program, the Illinois Savings program, the Oregon program, where they're providing retirement accounts to small businesses to leverage into because they can't afford the costs of setting up their own retirement plan. So you're seeing this, amalgamation of all of these really cool stories coming together in ways that really are about helping people. And that's ultimately what the storytelling is, hoping to facilitate. But go to our website and you can check out Lila's Cupcakes. We recorded the session.
I will.
Oh, I love it.
I love
That's
it.
great. That's great. Well, we're going to have to wrap up here because I'm looking at the time, but we could go on forever. This has been just really a real pleasure, and just thank you so much, Matt, for being here and giving us such a wealth of information. I feel like our listeners got both data and stories and things that they can actually act on. I know that for me, one of the highlights, well, there were many, but certainly in terms of those actions that you feel doable. Like I really, that first thing you talked about in your 3 points, just fund an emergency savings account, and put $500 in it. I mean, this is not rocket science. And I love to leave people with advice and recommendations that feels doable. This is not meant to be just for the Fortune 500s out there. Clearly, you guys are doing something that really benefits everyone and is for everyone. So that's certainly one takeaway for me. A second is really about storytelling and the use of stories, and just the powerful reminder today, I think, of that stories are about people. And so think about people, and that data and stories go together, and that really one serves the other, but one alone without the other doesn't work. So to me, those are the takeaways today. I don't know, Jules, if you have anything to add to that for our listeners.
I was going to tease Matt to try to become a little more animated about your topic the next time you come on, because you're so
the passion
blasé.
Doesn't come through.
I know, nothing. We could work with you. We can bring that out more. But I think, but it's true. Like, you take a topic that somebody might not pay attention to, you make it real. And I think you're a living proof of that, and that you have it all synced up together about what you're doing and applying it. So you're doing great stuff. So this is a real honor and pleasure. So that's what I learned. Stories matter.
And if all the podcasts end with me getting gratuitous compliments, I'm going to really enjoy podcasting. So
okay,
there you go. Yeah. Well, at least ours does. So where
Speaking
do
the truth.
people find the Financial Health Network and related topics like you talked about?
So you can certainly come to our website, financialhealthnetwork.org or finhealthnetwork.org. Sign up for newsletters. We produce a lot of our content is for public use. So it's it's free and available for the public to understand. We also work directly with large organizations and small organizations, employers, financial institutions, fintechs, nonprofits, policymakers. We really are building an ecosystem of folks committed to making financial health a priority for everyone. So come follow us, come join us. We got lots of events. I'm the least cool person that works at FHN, so it only goes up from here. So if you like what I had to say, wait until you meet some of my colleagues.
Well, that has prompted our curiosity now. We have to check that out then.
That's right. We're definitely going to check it out. And as always, if you want to learn more about narrative and storytelling in business, go to narativ.com, Narativ.com, just one R, no E. And of course, you can reach out to Julienne and myself through this podcast. There's a variety of different things you can find in the notes on the show page. And of course, we always welcome your feedback and questions. So thanks again for a great edition of Story Talks. Thank you, Julienne. Thank you. And thanks, Matt, once again for being here today. Really, really a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Thank you both.
Narativ Story Talks. For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narativ.com.